We are recording.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It is 10:01. Welcome to the February ESInet Users Group meeting. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Jennifer is putting a link in the chat for everybody to sign in so that we can get attendance. But because we do have a couple of things that we want to go through today, I'm going to move along and just call the meeting to order. The first thing that we have on the agenda is the report of the results of the strategic plan vote. And so I'm actually excited to say that it did not pass, which means we get to work on it more. Yay. So after seeing that, I think the best course of action for this group is for us to have a workshop just for that strategic plan, and it doesn't have to be limited to one workshop. We can do this workshop until we are through that document and everybody is happy with the outcome. So I will work with Jennifer on that, and we will send out dates for the workshop. We will give everybody plenty of time, just because we know how calendars are and how they fill up quickly. But once we do that, then anybody is welcome to be part of that group and work on that document. So that is the report for the results of the strategic plan vote and how we will be moving forward with that. With that said, I want to make sure that Lumen has enough time for their presentation. So I want to move forward with that. And Jeff, are you going to be presenting, or we have somebody else?
Rich Johnson from Entrado will actually be presenting, so if you want to promote him.
Okay. Jennifer, do you need to do that, or?
He should be able to go ahead and present.
Yeah.
Let me just
I can. I got the button available to me. So
great.
Sorry, Jeff. Are we going to get started now with that? I apologize.
I think so. Yeah, Kathy, are we ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Whenever you're ready.
All right.
Hey Jeff, don't you want to introduce the Lumen team?
Yep. I was waiting for Rich to bring that up here. So
Okay. I'm sorry.
We're getting close.
Oh yeah.
And Steve, I have to say your profile picture is amazing. You look good. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for allowing us to do this. We're excited with what we have to offer here. So, and to Steve's point, I want to go ahead and we'll do real quick introductions. I think most of you we've met, but myself, Jeff Winkleman, and I am the account director that covers Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And I'm excited with what Rich is going to present here. So with that, I will turn this over to Mr. Deloche for his introduction.
Yep. Hey, good. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Hey, good morning. Yeah, I think I've been around for a while. I was part of the ECAT. I'm the Lumen Solutions Engineer Manager. So my team, from a technical perspective, supports Jeff, and it's my team that kind of works with our different vendors and partners to come up with solutions to help solve our customers' business challenges.
Thanks, Steve.
And happy Valentine to all the young ladies on the call.
Thank you. And we also got Tim Kunkelman from Lumen. I think everybody's familiar with him, but Tim, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, good. Excuse me. Good morning, Tim Kunkelman. Do government affairs and regulatory work for Lumen.
Thank you. And I think that's all we've got for the Lumen team on here. Unless I'm missing somebody, I need to do a quick scan. And we've got Rich Johnson from Entrado.
Hey, folks. I'm Rich Johnston. I think you'll know me by now, but I'm a solutions engineer over here at Entrado. Super duper excited to talk through this stuff today. I've seen it in action in multiple states across the United States, and it just brings in better routing, a better solution for the entire state of Colorado. It's really exciting. So I'm excited to talk through it, answer your questions. Yeah, so we can jump right into it if folks are ready.
Yep. You want to go ahead and bring up the agenda?
Yeah, hold please. Okay. So I think first we're going to talk, Tim's going to talk here briefly about the tariff next steps, where we are with the process, how it's going to go through the next steps. Then I will talk about the particular items that are being added to the tariff. Includes our transitional data management solution, help with GIS and keeping it in sync as it gets deployed. Our GIS routing solution, allowing calls to be routed based on actual XY of the caller and using the GIS and PSAP actual boundaries versus ESNs, and then protocol conversion to I3 when PSAPs are ready to do that with their CPE equipment. Talk about adding text to 911 to the ESInet. So some folks have that now using a different VPN type of connection. This offer allows the PSAP to purchase it through the tariff and use the ESInet, that highly diverse redundant infrastructure, for the actual traffic of the text. And then we'll talk about from a medium level the pricing on the tariff and what that looks like. So Tim, if you want to talk about the next steps with the tariff, we can get started.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So I've been doing some work on putting the tariff together with the help of Rich and others. My goal is, we had talked, I don't know, I can't recall what last call it was on, but we had talked about the milestone of the next task force meeting in March, having this tariff ready to go. And so what I want to do, though, is have the opportunity to share it with folks beforehand, so that, similar to how we did the ECATs, where we can try and work on it before we file it, so that we're not delaying the process, and that we're fixing the things that folks see on it ahead of time. So I hope to have, I've got a few things that are now behind me in the 911 space. So I've got an opportunity to put more effort into this. So I should have something here in the next, week or two for sure, ahead of the task force meeting, so that we can share that with folks, discuss that further, and then either maybe have a couple of meetings similar to how we did ECATs, and then file that with the commission, in the hopes of having it effective by, I think was probably realistic, is just by summertime, that we'd have it effective. We could start implementing it then. So some of the language I'm still working on are some of the specific puts and takes of implementing it. So I've got all the language around what's the service, what are the descriptions, what are the prices, but the holes that I have right now are around the actual purchasing and implementing and things like that. So that's where I'm at on that. Take any questions on that, any comments or thoughts or suggestions. Hearing none. Oh, Joe.
Joe, go ahead.
Be filed, you said, before summer. I assume there's a transition to get all of this in place. And
Hey Joe, hold on. You kind of came in mid-sentence.
okay, so I understand you're going to file this before summer. There'll be a transition, I'm assuming, to get all this into place. We can only increase the not statewide 911 surcharge that pays the tariff charges, in January. I think it is. And so are you anticipating that we'll be incurring tariff charges for these services before that increase can go into place?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's probably something we need to work out as far as the timing of filing it, what the cost will be and how it will flow. And I think Rich is going to be able to kind of walk through, the implementation flow. So we may be able to begin doing some work. I think that's a great question. I think we'll have to make sure we're cognizant of what the rates are and what the surcharge is covering today.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. It's back to you, Rich.
Sorry, I was speaking on mute there. Great. So we'll go through here what the identification of the services, what they do. We can talk about high-level timelines as well to match up with the surcharge. So we can go through that. But I'll get started if everyone's okay with that. And get to my next slide. So TDMS stands for Transitional Data Management Service. And what it is this is a normal call flow of what things look like in a next-gen transitional state. And what I mean by that is before all the carriers, the originating service providers actually deliver calls in an I3 fashion. And what that means is that they will eventually be responsible for delivering the voice and the location information at the time of the call, or provide a reference for us to go grab that location information. Not well, there's a couple of wireless carriers that are getting close to that, but generically speaking, no carriers are doing that right now. So until all of those carriers can actually manage the location data themselves and change out their technology to be able to send that location information and voice IP at the time of the call, we continue to have to manage two different environments. One is what I would call the traditional alley. We call it in next-gen location database. We have to continue to manage their data for them in a location database, as well as managing GIS information, which will be used for routing. So in this case, if without an additional service, the PSAP and the MSAG coordinator would continue to manage their alley and their MSAG to support that legacy location information function, and the carriers that are sending in their location information the old-fashioned way. And also the GIS authority will need to manage their boundary, their street center line data, for I3, the different police, fire, EMS boundaries through our GIS portal. So there's two different solutions here while we're in this transitional state. MSAG management, because we still have to work with the originating service providers to do that until they change, and GIS management for the boundary management, so we can do routing based on GIS. And those, without a service that kind of binds those two together, those processes and procedures between the MSAG coordinator and the GIS data management authority need to be pretty closely synced, because if the MSAG 911 addressing folks make a change, they need to let the GIS folks know, and vice versa, and they have to make those changes pretty much simultaneously to keep everything in sync in the database. Everything make sense so far as to why we have to why those two have to be managed differently to deal with this transitional flow? All right, I will take silence as understood. So again, just through those processes, again, we have to continue to manage MSAG for those location database records that come in from the originating service providers, all the MSAG updates, ESNs. That location validation has to happen up front with the carriers, as well as the GIS has to be loaded through our spatial interface. Part of what that process is before going to GIS routing and going to I3 is that it's on the responsibility of the PSAT, the MSAG coordinator, and the GIS authority to get a match rate between their MSAG address data and their GIS address data. And in GIS, we talk about road center lines and we talk about address points. I'm going to stop for a second. Kimberly, you have a question?
Hi, Rich, I do. So I'm just thinking about a couple of different items here. So one is the tools that Intrado offers to do that match rate.
Mhm.
And we use those to get our data at 99.99% accurate, which is
Right.
great. So are those tools going to become available for everybody to use so they can do that match of their data?
Yeah, so I will get there, Kimberly.
Okay,
The service.
perfect.
So I'm kind of describing what needs to be done, and then I'm going to describe, if this is okay. But I'll circle
Of
back if I
course.
don't answer your question. What the
Yeah.
TDMS service does.
Okay, great.
Um,
And then my other question is, and maybe you're going to cover this too, is we are doing LBR with many of the tier 1 carriers.
uh-huh.
So doing that location-based routing, is your presentation going to kind of dive why this is needed versus just that PSAP boundary layer that the wireless carriers are using to route those 911 calls?
Yeah, I'll touch on
Okay,
that too.
thank you so much. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. And that's more in the next step, which is GIS routing. We'll talk about the call flow and how things get revalidated using the PSAP designated and GIS authority designated boundaries versus what can be somewhat generic boundaries that the carriers use in their LBR process. But I'll get into that too. So generally speaking, we want to get a 98% match rate between the MSAG records and the GIS, either road center lines or address point records. And once that's up to 98% or better, and we always say we want to get better, we want to get as close to 100% as possible, then normally that process would move forward. So what this TDMS service does is it's a two-parter. One is what we call onboarding. So that in this TDMS service, if the PSAP and the GIS authority decides to go forward with it, we work closely with the PSAP and the GIS authority and the MSAG coordinator to walk them through and provide a dedicated resource to help you get up to 98%, provide reporting for where you're missing that mark. We can rerun that reporting, see where the fallout is. I help identify that for you so you can work to say, okay, in this case, you had fallout. I'm making an example, you're at 70%. Here's the 30% fallout. This is where it differs between your GIS information and your MSAG information, so we can provide those reports. So we constantly work hand in hand with you to get you up to that desired match rate of 98% or better. The additional thing is once we get up there and we work with you to get up there, we provide something called a GeoMSAG. So we then wipe clean the MSAG you have, and we create a new MSAG based off of your GIS information. Because now that they're in sync, we can say, okay, let's wipe the old MSAG clean, and let's create a new GeoMSAG that actually has 100% match rate the day we go forward with it. So that's the onboarding process, is that we have a dedicated person walk you through and work with you to identify outstanding errors and get you up to the 98% match rate or better. The second step of onboarding is once we've worked through all of that, we then recreate a new MSAG for you called a GeoMSAG. And that MSAG will now be 100% match rate with your GIS going forward. As a side note, that MSAG, we now have the capability, and folks have asked, that MSAG can either be road center line based. So based on the road center lines, more like a range based like the MSAG is today, or it can be address point based. It all depends on the capabilities and what information that GIS authority and PSAP have. If they have address points for every 911 address, then we will create a GeoMSAG based on those address points. So we move more towards an address point MSAG, which is somewhere the industry is trying to, or the 911 folks and have been trying to get to for quite a while, if those are available. If not, we can do road center line based and have the match rate and the GeoMSAG created from that. Is it Jackie? Do you have a question?
It is Jackie, and I just wanted to, is that an either or could you have both?
So for one GIS authority, it's an either or. For the state, it could be both. So we could have Boulder go to a road center line based GeoMSAG, and we could have Denver go to an address point MSAG. But within its own boundaries would have to be the same. Now, you'll still provide us the address point layer. So let's say you don't have all your address points, but you have some. We would take that layer because we'll do further validation on that as part of the call processing, but we just won't base the MSEG off that unless it's 100%.
Great, thank you.
Now, I just had someone come to my house and start doing some work. Is there some background noise on my side? If there is, I can take a minute and move rooms.
I
You're
don't
fine.
have anything.
Okay, good. If it gets bad, let me know and I'll take 2 minutes and run down in the basement. All right, so that's what that first part is what we do. We call onboarding. We help you get up to that match rate, and then we create a GeoMSEG so that you're at 100% match rate. So that's day one. Then we want to maintain it because we've done this before and we've helped PSAPs get to that onboarding or that match rate. But then day one starts and we start managing the data and little elements change. MSEG changes are made and maybe that operational procedure isn't in place with the GIS authority or vice versa, and they start getting out of sync. So what the next step of the TDMS service does is it continues to keep those in sync. So once we pull the trigger and say, okay, we're good, we're at 100% match rate, we want to go into service mode, then any change that comes in through the GIS side is automatically transferred over to the MSEG side, and those changes are made through an automated procedure and through our analysts on our side. So if you went ahead and let's say you do address point and you add an address point, once that goes through the GIS side, an address point will be automatically added to the MSEG. Or if you're doing road center lines, if you change your range from 100 to 200 to 100 to 250, when that change goes through, that will automatically occur on the MSEG side. Now, the question we get asked sometimes is, okay, let's say the GIS makes a change and let's say it's road center line. And let's say you're trying to clean some things up and you go from 100 to 200 to 100 to 150. That would process through our GIS side, and then it gets processed through our MSEG side. But if there was a record, let's say attached to 175 that would be affected by that, then that would not take place. We still have all the checks and balances that we're not going to orphan numbers out there or orphan addresses. So then that would be a thing that we would work, our analysts would work, we'd indicate to your folks, get your MSEG person and your GIS person together through tools and say, okay, this change was made, reduce the range, but it orphaned this record. What is the actual, does that record need to be readdressed to fit into the range, or does the GIS road center line need to be changed, not 1 to 200, 1 to 100 to 150, but 100 to 175. So we still do all the checks and balances to make sure that there aren't orphaned records. But the part of this, and I'll get to you in 1 second, Matt, is that this is now an automated procedure. With this service, we get it up to 100% with that onboarding, and then we maintain it by using the GIS authority data as the driving data factor for both the GIS and the MSEG. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just thinking about this in a different way, maybe sort of to liken it to the discrepancy resolution processes we have today, but perhaps a little bit expanded, not reduced.
Yeah, I would say yes. It should encompass all of those concerns. We do have a new tool that we use called GIS Director, which I'll show here in a second. It mostly replaces the 911 net tool, and it allows whoever the user is, whether that's the MSEG coordinator, the GIS authority, or both of them, to view, if any error came through. It allows them to view both the MSEG side of it, the location data management side of it, as well as the GIS layers. So you could do some nice compares of this is what the GIS layer says versus this is what the MSEG says, and it helps the folks make the proper decisions for that discrepancy management. Go here. Okay, this leads right into that. So this is the GIS Director tool. This again does a couple of different things, maybe three different things. One, it gives you the examples of those 911 net piece parts that can show the errors, that you can do MSAG queries, that you can validate what you can do through the 911 net tool today. So that's it would be on the left-hand side of the screen here. Then you have a map display, and that shows the layers that are available through that were loaded through the GIS side. So you can do a comparison versus this is what my tabular data says, and for my location data, this is what my routing, my GIS information says, the various layers. So you could help do the comparisons there. And then you can also do some validations, since we do have your I3 data loaded, the GIS information and layers loaded. You can do specific searches as to what would be valid within the system today with that tool on the right-hand side. It is not Esri based. So let me get clarification on that. It is not. It is an application developed by. Sorry, I saw the question. The question was, is this tool Esri based? I do not believe so. I believe it's a unique application created by Intrado. I mean, it uses the layers that were loaded that are Esri based, but the tool itself isn't Esri based. But I can get validation for you there. So that's TDMS. Again, the call flow here is kind of what I discussed. Is once we get everything up into shape, once we're at 100%, we create that GeoMSAG, we're at a perfect place to start ongoing services for this. Hey, Joseph, you have a question?
Yeah, this might be a very uninformed question. I understand that we have a very active state, and so we have jurisdictions that are getting open space areas like trailheads and trails into their GIS data.
Mhm.
Is that something that will be the Master Street Address Guide? I don't know if that applies to it. Is that all something that in NG911, when we're getting the geospatial or the device-based hybrid, that you'll be using?
No, I would say no, unless that is a valid 911 service address. Then that wouldn't be. Now we would be using the overall boundary information. That trailhead would fit within the overall boundary for the PSAP, and we would route based off of that. So if we got a call from a wireless carrier that fell within that boundary, we would route it to the appropriate PSAP. But that level of information, unless it's a 911 address, that a serviceable address that would be validated through a location service order input from a carrier, we wouldn't use that information.
Thanks.
Yep. And Kim, I think I saw a question, but it went away too fast for me to see it.
Hey, Rich, I don't think it's for this service that you're offering. It's more for the big picture for the 911 community.
Okay. We can maybe. Do you want to wait until the end and we can ask it then, or would you like to ask now?
I'm just trying to understand. We have monies allocated at the Resource Center for a GIS project from the CPAP funds, and I'm just wondering how that's going to close gaps for this tariff offering for the TDMS service. So it's kind of just trying to fit those puzzle pieces together, because I mean, this is critical. Lita's been doing this and using your services and tools for a while now. We're complete point-based address map for Larimer. We're almost done with Jackson County. So this all makes sense. We're using this tool. It's great, and everything does need to be aligned and matched up. We also address our open space and parks. We apply an address to them so we can match and route calls correctly to them.
Great.
So I'm just trying to close that puzzle piece on that GIS project for the Resource Center.
Sure. And I think more people on this call know more about that than I do. But I think that's a great discussion to have. And maybe if there's some time at the end, just so I can get through this stuff. That
Yeah,
makes
of
sense?
course.
Okay. All right. So yeah, this is a call flow that we talked about. I already went through. So once that database is in sync, the GIS will be the main driver for any changes. That road center line address point data that comes through would be validated, go through our QA/QC process in our GIS side, be loaded there. It then would be sent through to our location database, be validated against the GeoMSAG, be updated if necessary, and be loaded into the ALI database. That then becomes viewable in that GIS director map viewer that I showed you, and then it allows SOI new location information to be updated there. Again, if there are issues, whereas the information was loaded through the GIS side but conflicts with what's in our MSAG, our GeoMSAG, then that's where our analysts come into play. You'd be able to see those errors through the GIS map viewer. There would be communication between the analysts and whoever has access to that map viewer, which is most likely the GIS authority and the MSAG coordinator, to work through those issues. And then the record would be resubmitted through the GIS side if it needed to be updated, if that like street range or address point needed to be updated. If not, then the address itself could be readdressed to fit within whatever was sent by that GIS update. So those are more the one-offs, the daily work that our analysts will continue to do with your folks to work through those daily kind of issues. Yes, Jackie.
So Rich, if I understood that correctly and wasn't spacing off too badly, the Entrada would be handling the GIS corrections for the 911 data, correct?
Well, so it's always the GIS corrections or updates are always going to be made by the PSAP side or the GIS authority side, but we will identify them and help be the intermediary as to what the right next step is. We're not going to go in there and change your GIS data, but we will direct you as to here's the conflict, this is the problem. Either we need to take, for my example, we need to either readdress the issue that was the address that was orphaned, or we need to get a new GIS update from the GIS authority to cover that address. So we'll be the intermediary. We're not going to go and make physical changes to the GIS data, but we'll be the intermediary to help you decide which is the right way to go.
Great, thanks for the clarification. Sorry.
Sure. So that's TDMS. That's to get, again, to help get the boundaries ready, to get all of the location data management in sync, and to get the wire line data, the data that's loaded into the location database associated to latitude and longitude, so it may do GIS routing. The other, so that's the service that again allows the data to be ready to go for prime time for GIS routing and ISO. There are features and functions to in the system to enable GIS routing. So what does that mean? So what GIS routing is when a call, sorry, let me take a step backwards. The way it works today in Colorado is although we're on a next gen system, we're still using tabular routing. We're still using ESN based routing. So when a call comes into our system, we associate that telephone number, whether it's a wireline telephone number or a pseudo ANI from a VoIP or a wireless call, with an ESN, that ESN then routes to the appropriate PSAP. When we start talking about GIS, we are now routing based off of a physical location of a call. And that can happen a couple of different ways. But I'll give you some background. In today's infrastructure now for wireless and VoIP, we're seeing about a 60 to 80% success rate on that initial XY that we can go and capture from the wireless carrier, the VoIP carrier, or the third-party provider that manages that data on behalf of those carriers. So for GIS routing, what we do is we enable that feature to go out and do the pre-query to wherever that database is. If it's a wireline number, it would be held within our own location database. If it's a wireless or VoIP number, we go out to those providers and acquire that. So when a call comes in, we identify it as a GIS routing trunk group, if you will. We then redirect that call to go out and pull that location information from that, either the internal source or the external source. Our timing works out. We have a global timer of about 1.3 seconds. So we'll go out and query, let's say it's an Atmo call. We'll go out and query the Atmo third-party provider, which happens to be Entrado Mobility, to acquire that XY information. If we get that XY information back in a certain short period of time, which is 1.3 seconds is the way our system's set up, then we can take that XY, and as long as it's a good XY, and what I mean by that is it's a true like traditional phase 2 XY with a relatively low uncertainty. We have our uncertainty set to 160 meters today. So if it's a good XY that we get back that we know is a phase 2 type of solution, and that it's a low uncertainty, we can then plot it within our systems, within the boundaries that the PSAP has assigned as their boundaries for answering calls. We can figure out what PSAP that is by the XY and then route that call to the appropriate PSAP. Again, from our perspective, we can do GIS routing without I3 delivery, which in some cases would be a great feature to have, because in some cases PSAPs, it might be a while before PSAPs change out their CPE equipment to accept I3. And GIS routing can be done in the grand scheme of things very, very quickly, because the amount of data that's available for wireless and VoIP carriers today, like I said, about 60 to 80% of the calls that we're seeing now, we can get the information today from those VoIP and wireless carriers. To enable GIS routing, at a minimum, we just need a boundary, which tells us this is the boundary in which you're receiving calls for. For I3, which is down the road, again, you need some CPE changes there to be able to accept it. We also need additional layers for I3, because the way I3 works is you have police, fire, EMS layers, and ESNs go away. So I3 can get a little bit more complicated. There's a lot more piece parts to I3, but because GIS routing, again, that location information is available for the wireless and VoIP carriers today, right now, and because we just need, in essence, a generic answering boundary, a PSAP authoritative boundary, we can get GIS routing up and running very quickly. But again, GIS routing is required for I3, but I3 is not required for GIS routing. And in that case, again, the how is, it aligns well with TDMS as well, because we do, one of the boundaries we need for I3 is that PSAP authoritative boundary. So if TDMS is also a service that's turned up for a PSAP, these things align pretty well together. But all of those GIS updates occur through, just to reiterate, occur through that GIS spatial interface from the GIS authority. But once we have that boundary, the PSAP authoritative boundary loaded within our system, we can very quickly activate the calls, the trunk groups for the calls to come in to go query and be able to get GIS information from those wireless and VoIP carriers and be able to plot immediately once we, again, have that boundary for the PSAP. What I can tell you, and I'll take some questions in a second, but what I can tell you is we've done this in various places across the country, and various PSAPs have varying degrees of I3 readiness. But typically, the PSAP will at least have a generic boundary we can use for routing. And rather than wait for those PSAPs to become fully I3 ready, we've been able to turn up a ton of PSAPs doing GIS routing. And in my mind, the biggest benefit of I3 is the GIS routing portion. So if we can look at those 60 to 80% of calls that we're getting good XY and make routing decisions based on XY versus ESN, and we can do that quicker rather than waiting time to do I3. My suggestion always is let's go forward with it, and then we'll work I3, in parallel. And when the CPE is ready and those other layers are ready, we'll do that. But GIS routing is awesome. We've seen it just recently in South Dakota, in Nebraska. It's extremely successful, and it is reducing those bordering, PSAPs where maybe a cell site and sector routes one place, but the GIS XY routes another is helping. Now, to go back to Kimberly's question on LBR has been great, and we're very happy the wireless carriers are taking that additional step to do a location query on their side. What happens when that comes into our infrastructure is we redo everything they did. And a couple of different things. It does take a couple extra seconds to get routed to us, so there may be better XY information by the time it gets to us, which means it may fall into a different PSAP boundary. It also, our PSAP boundaries are provided by you versus the PSAP boundaries that the wireless carriers and VoIP carriers use are usually pretty good, but they're not as detailed as they are when we get them directly from the PSAP. Additionally, there are additional GIS policy routing functions that we can do that the carriers will never be aware of. So we can do GIS routing based off of abandonment routes. We can do it based off alternate routing. We can do special event routing that if it falls within a specific area for I3, we can say, hey, for this area, if you're having a parade or something of that sort, we can put in a unique boundary to make decisions to route to other places. Those are all things that the wireless carriers won't be aware of. So they'll just say, okay, it fits within this square that I have, and I'm going to send it to Boulder, which immediately makes it so much better than it used to be by cell sector and by cell site and sector. But they're not going to have the level of alternate default routing and special event routing that we have in place and we manage in our A911 ESInet. So there'll always be benefits as well as a little bit more time where the address could have been changed and will be replotted as well. So there's benefits. I'm super happy that they're doing the LBR on the front side before it gets to us, but we will re-perform that, and there will be cases definitely that the call will be rerouted from their original decision based on the information we have from you. Does that make sense? Matt,
I think
fire
that's
away.
Rich, I think that's a fantastic explanation. One of the questions that I hear once in a while is, okay, so let's say we get to this point. What is the timeline for then being able to take into account place name data, whether it's in the NG911 data model's current landmark place name methodology or place name points?
I don't want to give you misinformation, Matt.
Okay.
So let me see what my GIS side of the house has to say about that. I don't want to get it wrong.
Sure.
So let me take that one back, and I can send an email to the group as to where we are with that. Yeah. I may answer it, but I may answer it incorrectly. I was about to start trying, but I don't want to give you misinformation. So
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's just, the question is as much rhetorical as anything. We need to get here first, but we do have folks asking about that very recently. So I just wanted to pose the question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll ask the questions to the right resources on my side, and I'll get back to you, I promise. So the way we again, and we'll
The heads up, we have about 15 minutes left.
Okay, let me get a little faster because I do want to show you. Maybe the major takeaway from this is I3 requires GIS routing, but GIS routing doesn't require I3. And you'll see it in the pricing, the way we did it is because GIS routing is ongoing. That's an ongoing monthly fee. The I3 we decided just to do as a one-time because that's a reconfiguration of the endpoint to receive it in an I3 fashion. So the I3 is a one-time, the GIS is a monthly recurring. And this is just, again, I probably should have put this on while I was walking through, but when the call comes through our side, where it made all the routing decisions before was in that ESRP situation where the ESN was related to the PSAP and we just shot it out to the PSAP. That's a tabular world. Now with GIS routing, we're going to go out to our location database and we're going to go retrieve new updated real-time location information from the wireless or VoIP carriers. We're then going to take that on. We're going to put it over to our what's called our ECRF, which is that big GIS database with all the different PSAP layers, and figure out which PSAP it falls into, and then make the decision to go to the PSAP. That spatial interface is what feeds the ECRF. That's where the GIS authorities will use to update their geospatial information. And I talked through most of this, so I'm gonna go over it real lightly. This was the discussion that in the future, originating service providers will be responsible for providing their own location information at the time of the call. They pre-validate it through something called a LVF, which is something we will support. So every time when we get all your GIS information, road center lines, address points, we load it into this location validation server, location validation function, and the carriers will be responsible for pre-validating their location information before they send it. But because none of the carriers are doing that right now, we still have to maintain that location database. The final thing, and then we can, thank you for pushing me along, Jennifer. Do you want to leave some time for questions? Is text to 911 over the ESInet? So there'll be an option within the tariff to go ahead and purchase text through the tariff. This will be uses a lot of the same features and functions as text does today. So there's something called the text control center that when the wireless companies send their text, that directs it to our ESInet. But rather than the way it works today, where the connection from the PSAP equipment is through a virtual private tunnel over the internet into the TCC to get that text information, that conversation will now happen over the ESInet and through that A911 call. So the connectivity, the dedicated redundant connectivity that we use to send voice calls to the PSAP would also be used for texts, and just makes it more reliable, more redundant, and uses the ESInet as a path to get to that PSAP. And I think we did a pretty good job of looking at costs and understanding all that stuff. So the pricing's pretty good on that. So finally, we'll get to here, and I'll just lay it out real quick, and then we can start taking some questions. Or Jeff, did you want to? I'm sorry, you wanted to talk about the pricing here.
No, that's all right. It's pretty self-explanatory when you see what's on the screen there. So we've broken it down to where you've got your monthly recurring costs and then also the non-recurring costs. So like I said, it's pretty self-explanatory for the GIS routing, the IP protocol, the TDMS, and the text. And this is all based on a kind of, just like the ESInet now, with a concurrent call session breakout. So those prices that you see are per concurrent call session. So if you have 10 concurrent call sessions, you take that price times 10.
Yep. And again, the methodology here for TDMS, a big bulk of that work is done for the onboarding portion, and then this ongoing services to maintain it. Text to 911, either it would be converting it from the existing solution to the new solution, or just establishing it, which is the one-time fee there, and then the ongoing maintenance of all of GIS routing, TDMS, and text are seen in the monthly recurring fees. You'll see again, to maintain the I3 protocol, there is no charge, because that more is an initial configuration, a test, and a turn up, and then we just leave that specification in place. So no ongoing fees for the i3 protocol, but the others have ongoing management fees, which is why there's MRFs associated with them. And I'll stop for questions. Sorry for talking so much and so quick. Hey, Joseph.
Yeah, this roadmap, there's a lot of information here. Are you willing to share your deck with us?
Yeah, I don't see any reason for that. I'll PDF it and get it over to the Lumen folks to shoot out to everybody.
Thank you.
Yep. Kimberly.
So you, or Tim, kind of loosely gave a little bit of a timeline. So you have pricing, which is great from a big picture perspective. I mean, this is a huge increase. Just looking at numbers of what LEDA pays today, we would be going up to paying around $650,000 a year for our tariff fees to Lumen with these added services. And this doesn't include the improvement plan that is also under discussions. So do you have an idea of when you guys are going to file so we can start looking at numbers and budgets? And it was already asked by Joe about the state surcharge. So there's a lot of pieces here to then align that with the improvement plan and these impacts to the 911 authorities.
That's a good question, Kimberly. As far as the timeline for this, that was going to be the question that we're going to bring up. The succession we look at is the next step would be to present this to the task force next month. And then pending, as Tim said, if we want to have further discussions or if the overall presentation as far as what the tariff filing looks like, we'd like to file it after that meeting, not right after, but in that timeline to be able to have this available as soon as possible. But if there's further discussion that needs to happen, we want to do that to be able to do similar to what we did with ECATs, to be able to answer those questions and make sure that the filing is going to be right. So timeline, if there's no pending questions or challenges or issues with it, we could look realistically at the end of March to be able to file that, and then look at how the offering would play out as far as the timeline, to your point.
Hey, this is Steve. Let me chime in. I think before Tim left, I think realistically, he's probably looking at this summer filing, and he's starting the process now because he had to put together the documentation for the tariff, and I know there's another document he has to prepare that kind of lays out all of the cost, because the Colorado tariff is a cost plus. So I think Tim's plan is to have a bunch of his information ready to present at the next task force meeting, but realistically, the plan would be to get this filed sometime this summer. According to Tim, is the normal timeline for people to provide responses and feedback.
Go ahead, Kimberly.
Great, thank you for that. And did I understand that the text to 911 piece was going to be optional? So is your tariff filing going to be all, or are you carving out tariff language and tariff filing, which would be different and unique, right? We've never looked at anything like that. That makes it optional to select some of these items, like the text.
Yeah. So a couple things. We spent a lot of time going out that path. And so I think the way the pricing is going to be structured, it could be all in individually. So we'll leave that up to the state as to how they want to implement. But, we're not using the term optional. I think what we're using is you can opt in or opt out, depending upon what the finances look like and what the plan of the state is. So I think in the past, the previous tariff filings have been, all in, right? You didn't have an option regardless of what the situation was. Like ECATs, the tariff kind of dictated, everybody had to participate. I think with these three offerings, eventually everybody's going to participate in the GIS routing once all your GIS data gets there. The TDMS is probably one depending upon where you're at with your GIS staff and what piece you want to hand over to Lumen and Trotto to manage. And then the text and 911 piece, there was a lot of conversation that we had up front around, hey, some sites have an over-the-top solution, or they may still have the Intrado ITS, and they want to have a tertiary option. So what we proposed here is for text and 911, if you have an existing solution in place that you want to keep, that we would still deploy, you could still deploy the ESInet solution, and the TCC could alternate route calls if both network connections are down. You would still be able to get your text calls over the top. So the text to 911 piece, there were quite a few PSAPs that wanted to be able to continue to use what they have as a backup to the text offering. Does that answer your question?
It does,
Okay.
but I have more. So,
Well,
and-
too
I
big.
know I am like so needy. So it's just my style. So for those authorities that have their GIS in good order and point-based and are already using your tools for their match rate, are we able, and is your tariff offering going to consider waiving or crediting those authorities that one-time fee for the TDMS? So for LIDA, for example, that's $98,000. And our GIS data we've been working on for years to prepare for spatial call routing, to prepare for it to be right. We've been using your tools and paying for your tools to get it where it needs to go. So if you haven't considered that, I would just toss it out there as something maybe to be considering.
And let me ask this, Kimberly, because maybe I don't understand the way folks get reimbursed, but I love and commend you and your area for getting ready. That's great. But that because this is, and to clarify with Steve, this is an opt-in scenario. If you never opt in, then Lumen would have never received that money for TDMS. So there's nothing to reimburse you, if that makes sense. If there's a reimbursement that happens, and Jennifer, keep me honest here, it would be the state that would reimburse that anything, not Lumen, because Lumen never received the funds for it. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
But yeah, I may not have worded that right. I'm just looking, so the TDMS is going to be an opt-in, opt-out on your tariff offering as well?
I believe, and Steve, that's what I want to clarify. I believe
Okay.
all, even though the word is not optional, it in essence has the same function that it's opt-in or opt-out. It's not an all, and Jennifer, you keep me honest too, but it was my understanding that this was a opt-in. Each one of these was an opt-in, opt-out scenario.
And if I could just jump in and say, I think we're at the very beginning of these discussions. And so I think it's premature to determine whether it be opt-in, opt-out, or if it would be a statewide offering. Obviously, you can see the numbers, and Kimberly has a good point about it. Having said that, with the statewide surcharge, we don't yet have a process to determine a formula in opt-in, opt-out situations. That doesn't mean we can't develop one. I'm saying we just don't have it at this time. So those are questions that would need to be answered as we get further into this process and exploration.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, and I think that's an excellent point, and we can take this one back. So the way I understood the question is, if I'm an agency that I have pretty good GIS data, and I still want to go to TDMS process, is there going to be a way to waive that NRC, since, you know, in your eyes, your data is already at the rate that the TDMS is going to get it to? Did I?
Right. And I would say not so much my eyes, it's going to be your eyes and your tools that we've been using, because I think a lot of us can be very proud and say, oh, we're fantastic, right? And it's the fact that we have been working with Intrado, using your tools, doing some QA, QC, hey, is our data ready? Because we wanted to vet that and make sure we were on the right track. And if we have a situation like that, even though we're talking about state 911 surcharge, if we have when we start to calculate and figure out, is it going to go from 9 cents to
Right.
25 cents? If we have X amount of dollars that don't need to be covered, or these one-time fees are truly out of our pocket, I mean, we have to look at that cost. So I would love to see a tariff offering. And if we need to take that offline as this stuff is being developed, we're happy to give some more input on that. We just think that all of the many our community members have paid for the 911 surcharge that we've poured into GIS over the years. We would hate to see that the state 911 surcharge increase so much more, so now they're paying it again, and we've already developed the data.
Just one comment, Steve. The
Go ahead.
only, just to clarify, so we can kind of see down the line a little bit, Kimberly. For that TDMS, it really includes two things. One, the one-time fee includes two things. One thing is what you've been doing, right? You've been working to get it up to as close to 100% as you can. The second thing it includes is the GOMSAG creation. So if that is something I don't think you have done. I don't think you've created your own GOMSAG. So I don't know if we need to talk about breaking that piece out too, or not. It's just something to think about.
Hey, and then let me say the reason that we have these calls is to take feedback from the committee so that once we do get ready to file the tariff, that everybody is well aware of what's going on, and we don't have a lot of resistance. So push back. That's why we're having these calls, so that we can make sure we address everybody's concerns and make sure that we are providing a solution that meets the needs of everybody within the state.
Looks like Jackie had her hand up first. Jackie?
Yeah, I just want to jump in here a second. It is really difficult for us as a state, based on statute, to opt in, opt out individually in tariff offerings. The state, the 911 state surcharge is baked into state statute, where it has to be remitted back to the agencies based on concurrent sessions. And so I understand Kimberly's point completely, that they've already paid for some of this and their citizens have already paid for it. If we increase the state surcharge, then we're still giving LEDA back. I mean, everybody would give everybody back the money from the state surcharge, but we're then charging our citizens more. And so there's some legislative issues that would need to be delved into to fix the idea of we could do optional. Some people can opt in and some people can't, because we can't remit the money back to the authorities that way.
Hey, and from a Lumen perspective, what we've tried to put together is a pricing philosophy based on initial conversations with the committee. And I think from my perspective, we're not trying to influence it one way or the other. We're fine with it being a solution that the state mandates and everybody does it. So this isn't where Lumen and Charter is trying to kind of dictate or change how you all statutes are put together.
I think we have time for one more question, and then as much as I would love to keep going, I think we're going to have to continue this conversation at another date. So I think Joe has his hand up.
Yeah, I'd first like to say, I think there are ways we can provide some flexibility within the 911 surcharge for some opt-in things. That the difficulty is if the price gets too big or too small. I know I believe Brett's contracts with Entrado to help keep its data. Most of the authorities which have the GIS-centric CAD systems are at 98% with their GIS data. My main question here is the 911 surcharge statewide that we use to pay the tariff charges. There is some slack in that because it's 1 cent increments, and we look at the whole state, that winds up, maybe getting more money than fits exactly. But when you're looking like a $2,000 per concurrent session, or maybe even a $400 per concurrent session one-time fee, that is kind of an extraordinary cost, that it would be easier if you could spread that out over a term so that it may fall within the slack we have in the 911 surcharge.
Joe, for clarification, are you saying to possibly rework this into the sense where it's mostly in, or more towards a monthly recurring cost?
Well, the problem with that is then you keep recurring indefinitely. I was thinking more that you would spread the surcharge amount over a 5 or 12 or 18-month period.
Yeah. Hey, this is Steve. We definitely can look at that, because I think the question, Winkelman, is, so if you do it in perpetuity, then that rate goes on forever. I think the question is that, let's say for years, once a PSAP converts over, for years 1 through 5, they pay X dollars MRC per month. And then starting in, year number 6, day 1, they pay X minus Y, because it's decreased because that NRC is fully paid for, and then it's just true to the MRC. Was that kind of your guidance there?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I didn't know we'd be talking
Yeah.
months or years. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not
And we did have a few versions of that. It became very, very complicated from a filing perspective, as if this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens for the first. So it became very, very complicated. The reason why we ended up at this is because those one-time fees are truly like open and shut. It's a specific thing that can be tracked and completed and done. So when you convert to an I3, there's a project plan, there's people, there's testing, and once it's done, and it's not done over a certain period of time. So just to kind of let you know where our heads were at, we did those sort of models as well, but it became extremely complicated and hard to understand what equated to what.
Yeah. Hey, so let me say this. I think it's a great ask. And Jeff, let's put that down as a note so we can have, when we have our follow-up with Tim, we'll bring that up, because, one of the things that I think we're smart enough to know is if we have some flexibility, the adoption rate and the feedback is going to be much positive versus, it's one way or the highway.
Right.
So we have that one. We'll definitely take that one up with Tim Kunkelman.
So while you're saying the customer's always right, one-time fees of 10% of that amount would seem really fair.
Yeah. But we will. I mean, in all seriousness, we will go back to Tim and just see what we can do. And I think the other question, Jeff, that we had is, for those customers that have the GIS data, let's say, to Richard's point, that GIS is TDMS is a phase 1, phase 2. I mean, can we break down that further? So we'll take that all under advisement and have a conversation with him and just see what we can do and how we can break this out so it's equitable for everyone.
Jennifer, I know we've gone way over, and I appreciate the time for this. For next steps on this, we talked potentially presenting to the task force, but I think maybe we could talk something interim with what we have to take away off of these questions, and then maybe we regroup and come up with the next step. I would love to be able to present something, maybe a condensed version of this at the task force to move forward with the next step of it.
Well, we have space on the task force agenda for this presentation and to continue this conversation. And I would imagine that we will have this on the agenda again in the March ESInet users group. So don't take this as the end all be all of the conversation. It's just the start. It's just that we're out of time for today.
Right.
So I appreciate everyone's time, and thank you very much for the presentation from Lumen and the Lumen team and the Entrado team. Please sign in at the link if you have not done, and this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel later today or tomorrow. So I hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's Day and the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll get you the slide deck here shortly.
Perfect.
Thanks, folks.
And
Thank you, everyone.
we'll put it in the materials for the meeting.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You're going to learn one of these days that when I say something, that 9 times out of 10, I'm right. I don't just make this stuff up. Yeah. Well, let's punch him in. I tell you what. Yeah. Can I end that call? Let's get out of there. How do I end? Oh, that was.